What's going on, guys? So today we're back with another tutorial, and today's lesson is going to be on using Bambu Studio, aka Bambu Labs' slicing software. So in this, we're going to go over the basics such as importing, exporting models, and how the overall interface of Bambu Labs' software is. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go onto MakerWorld, which, if you don't already know, is the website that Bambu Labs made where you can upload your models, and they're open source so anyone can download them completely free. So once we're on here, I'm going to go over to my account and I'm going to use one of my own models. So for this video, we're going to use the mechanical pencil that I made. And once we're here, we have different options. So we have obviously different print profiles, which are different setups based on your printer. So for me, I have the A1, so I'm going to use that. And then over here, we have options. So we have three options, as you can see. The first one is, as it says, open in Bambu Studio. And the second one is download the 3MF file. So a 3MF file is basically the file that is supported on the Bambu Studio to set up the profile. And the third one is a generic STL and CAD file, which are the 3D model files. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to open in Bambu Studio. So we can allow that, and we're just going to wait for this to load. Once our project loads, we should be taken to a prepare page. So for example, if you weren't aware, if you go onto your homepage on Bambu Labs, you'll have a generic setup where you have your profile on this side, you have a few options over here, and then you can have your recents and projects. So because we were already on the Maker World, we don't have to click open or create new project, but we can go straight to the options. So over here, we're going to be given the setup, and our printer will be based on how we set up our print profile. Because I have a Bambu Labs A1, I can choose, it'll automatically set up that printer. But if let's say I have a different printer like the X1, I can go over and click that, and I can adjust the preset values. So in this case, obviously, I'm not going to do that, but that's always an option. So now that we have our model here, you're going to notice straight away that you have a few options. So over here, you can edit the plate name, and this is pretty useful for when I have to do stuff like add multiple plates. Let's say I want multiple parts, so I want this pen to be over here, and I want these to be printed separately. I can do something like that, or I can have other reasons for that. So you're going to notice that's at the top, so you can always edit that at your own free will. The second option you'll notice is a bunch of stuff on the side. So over here, we obviously have an X. So that means that if you have multiple plates, you can always close it out and remove it. Over here, we have the auto button. So if you look closer, it shows an image of auto and a cube that's being rotated onto the plate. So this is useful if, let's say, the model you put was at a strange angle and it's not what would be recommended for printing, because obviously you would know that this is not a good way to print the piece. So if you click auto, it'll automatically align every single piece to what is best suited for the printer to succeed. And then below that, you're going to notice another button, which looks like a grid sort of icon. And when you click on that, if you have multiple parts or even a singular part, it'll organize it onto the build plate in the best possible manner. So let's say we have these all separated out like this. Obviously, this isn't efficient for the printer. So we can click this, and it'll automatically align them in the best possible way. Same thing with our other option, where it'll auto-rotate the parts for us. Let's say we have a few parts, and they're a little lopsided, such as this. What we can do is we can click the auto, it'll auto-set them, and then we can also get them onto the grid as we want. Okay, so now we have another option, and this option is to lock the plate, obviously. Let's say you don't want to adjust stuff on this plate, you can leave it like this. And then this one is to change the generic settings of the plate. Okay, so now that we have that done, we can look over at this left side. So on the left side, as I said before, you can adjust the printer that you have. And what you can also do is you can set up the different plates. So for example, Bambu Labs offers different types of plates, which give different effects on your print. So the basic is a textured PEI plate. Okay, so then once you're done with that, what you're going to have over here is your filaments. So the reason why this is important is because normally all the Bambu Lab printers have something called an AMS system, which is a multiple filament system. And why that's important is you need to calibrate which color filament is in which slot of your AMS system. So normally, let's say you don't have multiple filaments, you only have just one. You can obviously set that to whichever one you need, and you can change the color over here as you like. But obviously, I have multiple printer filaments, so I'm going to be able to do what I want with that. So that's why you would have different filaments. And let's say you wanted to change the color of your print. What you can do is you can go onto the object, select it, and when you right-click, you'll see at the bottom, there's something called change filament. So you can change the color, and then you can make your program or your print as you would like. So then after that, we have the generic settings, which you're going to notice are on every sort of slicer: quality, strength, speed, support, and the miscellaneous tab. So these types of settings are useful if you know what you're doing. But if you're a beginner, which you most likely will be watching this video, you can keep it on the generic settings. So these basic settings are the heights of the print. So obviously, as you may realize, the higher layer height, the lower the quality of the print, and also the shorter time it'll take to print. So you can adjust that, and then you have something on Bambu Studio called seam position. That's just whenever you slice your prints and whatnot, the wherever the printer starts on that layer, it's going to cause a little dot, and that's called the seam. So whenever it does multiple layers, it'll develop a line in a sense, and you can decide how you want that to be visible. So if you look on this printer, my seam is going to be this white line over here, and I can obviously change that into different options. Then we have a few advanced settings, which you probably don't need to worry about right now. And same thing with the strength. I would suggest keeping it as is because the Bambu Studio is pretty smart when it comes to the best possible way to print. And I would suggest if you leave it like this, you'll probably see the best results in your prints. And moving on to the next tab, we have the supports tab. This is also a very important tab because if you have certain types of prints, let's say, for example, I have this over here, what you're going to notice is normally a printer prints from the bottom up, right? So when you print it, you're going to notice that you're going to have a few issues. The reason is because when you print it, when it goes layer by layer, what's going to happen is if you have a flat surface in the middle, it'll start printing in the air, which obviously means it's not going to work. So you would have to enable something like a support, which is a little piece that is printed with your item while it's working, and it'll lift it up. So basically, for example, it'll be right here. So when it's printing on that area, what it'll be able to do is it'll be able to print on top of that support, which you can tear off at any moment. This is once again another setting that I don't recommend you change because Bambu Lab once again knows how to use their supports. You can tinker with it to find what works best for your environment, but I highly suggest leaving it as is. So when you look at this, you're going to notice that it's printing on top of that support, which can later be removed with pliers or whatnot. So that's your support tab. And then we have the miscellaneous tab. So this is a little important based on how your printer functions in general. So you have a tab called bed adhesion, okay? And what this does is it determines, like, let's say your printer doesn't want to print properly. What you can do is you can enable these settings. So for me, I have something called skirt loops enabled, which is this kind of like turquoise pattern going around the entire prints. And what this does is it helps the printer figure out how the first layer should be printed. And I can determine how high I want that. The next is called a brim type. So as you notice on the big pencil piece, I have this really dark blue circle which is attached to it. It's the same as the skirt, it's one layer tall, but the difference between this and the skirt is that this is supposed to support the pencil. The reason why is because this pencil is so tall that when it prints, it has slight movements which could cause it to tilt a little bit. So this brim at the bottom is supposed to help keep it in place, which can be removed once your print is done, obviously. And you can change how you want that to be set. Then over here you have something called a prime tower, which is mainly used if you're using multiple filaments. So for example, because I'm using the one white filament, I'm not going to have a prime tower. But let's say I decide to change this pen chassis to blue. You're going to notice this big tower comes into play, and that's called the prime tower. So what that does is when you're printing, obviously it has to go layer by layer, but obviously because the printer only has one extruder head, it has to change the filaments. So what it does when changing the filament is it prints in one of the colors, and then what it'll do is it'll go off to the side, change the filament, but what'll happen is you'll have a little bit of the previous color's residue remaining. So it'll do this prime tower where it'll print a little bit to try in hopes of removing that residue. And when you use a prime tower, it may waste a good amount of filament, but you'll notice that it's a lifesaver when it comes to doing these types of prints because almost 100% of the time you won't even notice that you were changing filaments because they look like they were printed separately. And it's really useful, obviously, because I'm using different parts. A good example of having a secondary build plate would be if I had a second color, I could add it to this plate, and what it'll do is now I won't need a priming tower, and that'll save a lot of time because I'm not changing filaments every layer. Instead, I'll have two different plates that'll print one after another. That saves another time, and that's a really good example for what you would use a second build plate for. Then you have a few other options, which you don't really have to get into right now, because those are kind of like more so advanced options if you know what you're doing. So as per this section of the different options, that's going to be it for your printer, but you're going to notice at the top you have a lot more options. So if we look at the top for a second, you're going to see a few options, and I'll break these down for you. So the first one you have is a cube, and if you hover over it, it'll say add. Pretty basic. When you click on it, you can add any other file that you want onto the plate. Okay, that's how that works. And other here you have add plate. You may have noticed I clicked this a few times. You use this if you want to add a secondary plate, and you can use the X to remove it. Then you'll notice that these next two logos are the exact same as the ones you see over here because they do the exact same function. So one's obviously called the auto orient, and the other one is called arranging all the objects. So that's what those features do. Then you're going to notice a few other features. These don't matter too much. The reason what split to objects is let's say you have a multiple part print like this, but you don't upload it as a 3MF file, you upload it as an STL file. So there's an option where you can upload it all as one big piece, even though they're separate. So when you do that, what you can do is you can click to this, so it'll split them all based on the object's geometry. And then this one you can split based on the parts itself. So let's say I have a piece like this, but the top nozzle isn't actually connected to this. It's like has a little gap. When I click split to parts, it'll separate those two even though they're all on the same mesh. So that's really useful if, let's say, you have a custom part, or you have a part that you found online that you didn't make, but they're all put together and you want to separate them. Those two options can be really useful. So the next part is variable layer height. So what this does is normally printers print in the same height, but what variable layer height does is it can change the layer height for certain parts of your print. So for example, and as you know, obviously the layer height determines the quality. So for example, on this pencil piece, I have a very similar like uniform design. So I don't care how the layer height is for that. But if you go up to the top, I have this grip over here, which is pretty fine in detail. So it'd be preferred to have a higher layer height, smaller layer height for this, so that way the details can be more visible. So what I can do is I can set the layer height for this section over here. Then we have the different movements. So over here we have the generic move along your XYZ axis. Over here we have our rotation, pretty basic. And then over here we have our scale, so we can adjust it. Let's say we want to make it 20% larger. We can do that, and we can make it uniform, or we can adjust each axis individually. Then we have a lay on face, which is pretty similar to our auto orient, except for the fact that it won't do it automatically. So for example, let's say we want to do lay on face, we can choose a part of our piece that we want to lay it on. So what we can do is, let's say we have a piece, a model such as this. What we can do is we can choose to lay it on a certain face. So let's say I don't want it to print like this. I want to recommend it to do it like this. That's what the lay on face feature does. So we can customize the way that we want them to be printed based on our preference. Now the next option is cut, pretty basic. Once again, we can choose where we want to cut this object. Let's say we want multiple parts. We can adjust that right there and figure out where we want to cut it, and then we can have separate pieces. So that'll also be useful if we have multiple prints or something that's not ours that we want to customize a little bit. Okay, so the next one is a mesh boolean. So what you can do is if you want, like, let's say these two parts to be merged together, you can add them together and then you can connect them. The next option is called supports painting. So what this does is, let's say you have a support that the printer recognizes won't be too big of an issue and it'll go by itself, but you decide, oh no, I have to get a support on it because I don't think it'll work. So what you can do is you can paint that area you want the support to go on, and Bambu Labs' AI will actually recognize the part that you paint and add supports to it itself. It's a pretty useful feature if you have very complicated geometry. Obviously, this isn't something that's too complicated, so I will let the AI do its own thing. But if you have complicated geometry like a mask or something, what you can do is you can add this painting and it'll add the support for you. You can do the same thing for the seam. So let's say you want to have a seam at a certain location where you can have a design like this. What I can do is I can slice the plate and it'll add the seam in that same design that I gave it. And this is useful if you have certain types of prints where it'll look better if the seam is hidden in certain spots that Bambu's AI doesn't actually recognize. So you'll see a pattern like this. And then last but not least, we have our custom design features. So over here, we can add text to our designs. So let's say I wanted to put text here. I can write anything I want. I can write like testing, and then I can add it over here, and the AI will figure out how it should wrap around, or how it should kind of put itself on here. So I can do stuff like that. And then the next feature is actually the painting. So let's say you don't want to paint the entire object, but only certain parts of it using your multi-filament feature. So what you can do is, let's say for this tip of the pencil, I just want the top part of it to be painted a different color. Let's say we do blue. So what I can do is I can use these different options. So for example, if I wanted the top part, I can use the fill tool, and I can make this section all blue. In comparison to the rest, or I can do this. So I can basically customize these prints and designs to how I want. And last but not least, we have the measure tool. Obviously, let's say you don't know the actual dimensions of your print, so you want to measure from here to, let's say, here. What we can do is we can figure out the length, so we're getting around 24 millimeters. So we can use that feature if we want to figure out, let's say we want the paint to be only 10 millimeters in height. So we can use that measure tool to figure stuff out like that. So those are the useful parts of our print, and those are the main functions of the Bambu Studio. But let's say we add a print, but we don't want to slice it or print it. We just want to export it as a 3MF. So a common feature that Bambu Studio has is you can import STL files and in return export them as a 3MF file. So you can use them for other features, or you can do vice versa. So right now we obviously imported a 3MF file, and let's say I want to export it as a different file, let's say STL. So I'll go over to File, and I can export and import it however I want. So over here you'll have the option to export them all as one STL or as different STLs. So if I were to click this, it would make, obviously I'll need a folder, but it'll make different STL files for each of the meshes. So that can be really useful if, let's say, you don't want to use Bambu Studio for the actual slicing software. It's very useful to use it if you want to convert the file type. So in short, you can see our designs can be easily designed and made using Bambu Studio, and I highly prefer using it because once you get the hang of it, you can make really nice designs, and they'll come out with really high quality because this slicer software is recommended for its own printer. So all in all, I highly prefer using Bambu Studio, and I hope that this tutorial helped you figure out how to better use it for your own projects. And I'll see you guys later. All right, bye bye.